Don't walk your dog there. This story comes from Cody. Even now, almost 20 years later, his voice still trembles when he talks about it. Cody's family had just moved to a developing suburb on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. It was one of those brand new neighborhoods pushed deep into the old oak forests of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The asphalt roads were still pitch black and soft, the kind that still smelled like hot tar. At night, the few streetlights scattered around didn't do much. Each one only lit a small patch of pavement, leaving most of the neighborhood swallowed by the woods. On both sides of the street, half-built houses stood with their wooden frames exposed, roofs unfinished, contractor trucks parked dead in the dirt. Mixed in between were a few homes already occupied, warm yellow lights glowing behind thick curtains, as if every family was trying to carve out a tiny safe nest in a place that still felt more like wilderness than suburbia. Cody's father, David, was a successful real estate agent. He was always busy, always driving, always shutting himself inside the house when he got home. He had never walked more than 10 yards around his own block, and he definitely never set foot near the cul-de-sac at the end of the street, where the streetlights didn't reach and the shadows of the forest began. One day, after closing a huge deal, a wealthy client gifted him something he'd always wanted, a purebred German shepherd. Big, strong, absolutely gorgeous. David named him Rex. He adored that dog more than he adored anything else. Built a full steel kennel in the backyard, brushed its coat every day, fed it premium beef like some prized show dog. And because of Rex, David finally changed his habits. Every afternoon, people could see him proudly walking the dog down the street, chin up, soaking in the admiration from neighbors. But those walks started getting strange. Their street ended at a cul-de-sac, right where the neighborhood touched the old forest. Standing there alone was a massive ancient oak tree, its branches so wide and thick they blocked out what little streetlight reached that far. One late evening, David was walking Rex as usual, phone pressed to his ear while talking business, loosely holding the leash. Suddenly, Rex jerked hard, so violently that David almost dropped his phone and bolted toward the oak tree. But it didn't pee like it usually did. It froze. Its fur bristled. Then it started barking, loud, sharp, frantic. Not the bark of a trained guard dog. This was terrified, enraged, desperate. Rex jumped up on the trunk, claws scraping the bark, staring into the dark branches above. Annoyed, David looked up to see what it was, and his heart dropped. About 10 feet up, partially hidden behind thick leaves, was a boy. A boy. He was so thin his ribs showed through the grime on his skin. His hair was a matted mess of dirt and leaves. He didn't sit on the branch like a normal kid. He clung to the trunk, arms and legs wrapped around it, body pressed against the bark like some kind of giant insect. But the worst part was his eyes, wide, glowing, and locked onto David and the dog. Then the boy smiled, a crooked, feral grin. David froze. In 6 months living there, he had never seen a kid like this. He opened his mouth to yell something, to ask where the hell his parents were. But before the words came out, he heard something behind him. Rex had stopped barking. The mighty German shepherd was on its back, legs curled, trembling violently, whimpering like something was crushing its throat. And next to the dog was the boy. He was no longer in the tree. He had come down silently. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, nothing. He crouched beside Rex, knees pulled to his chest, watching the dog writhe with a kind of cold, curious delight. David screamed, "Hey, get away from him!" The boy slowly turned his head toward David, still smiling, then stepped backward into the darkness of the oak's shadow and disappeared. David grabbed Rex, half carrying, half dragging him, and sprinted home. And the moment they stepped out of the oak's shadow, Rex suddenly stood up and walked normally, as if nothing had happened. But that was only the beginning. From that night on, Rex changed. Every night he howled, not barked, howled, long and mournful, echoing through the house until no one could sleep. On the 4th night, things got worse. Around 1 a.m., Rex's howling turned into banging, violent metallic thuds rattling the steel kennel. Cody's mother Linda tried to wake David, but he was too exhausted to get up, so she went outside alone. The backyard was pitch black. She turned on her flashlight and aimed it at the kennel, and froze. The kennel door was locked, but Rex wasn't alone. The dog was curled in the far corner, shaking uncontrollably, and standing right at the front of the kennel, gripping the metal mesh with both hands, was the boy, thin, filthy, eyes hollow and lifeless, just staring straight at her. Linda thought it was some kid who wandered in. She shouted, "Hey, whose child are you? Get out of there!" She stepped closer to open the latch, and the boy just faded. Didn't run, didn't move, just dissolved into the air, leaving nothing behind. Linda screamed and bolted into the house. The next morning, after hearing what happened, David finally accepted that this was no lost child. It was something else entirely, something wrong, something attached to that tree. He remembered the boy's stare. So he drove to the store, bought bags of candy and toys, went to the oak tree, and left them at the base, muttering apologies and begging it to leave Rex alone. For a moment, it seemed to work. Rex ate again, wagged his tail, acted like his old self. But that night, chaos struck. David had to go meet clients, leaving Cody and his mom at home. They were watching TV when a sound shattered the quiet, not barking, a deafening crash, over and over, like someone swinging a sledgehammer at metal. Linda ran to the backyard. Under the backyard lights, she saw it. Rex was killing himself. He backed up in the kennel, then hurled his head into the steel mesh, again and again. The metal rattled, blood smeared the bars. His muzzle was torn open, teeth cracked, but he didn't stop. It looked like something was controlling him, forcing him to destroy himself. She fumbled with the lock, screaming, "Rex, stop, stop!" The moment the door sprang open, Rex, with his head caved in and face covered in blood, shot out, slammed into her, and bolted down the street, toward the cul-de-sac, toward the oak. They found him there when David rushed home. Rex lay at the base of the tree, barely alive. Breathing in short, wet gasps, blood seeped not only from his wounds, but from his eyes, his ears, his nose, and even from his pores, staining the grass red. He looked at David one last time, and Cody swears he saw a single tear roll from the dog's cloudy eye before Rex stopped breathing. After Rex died, they hoped the nightmare was over, but on the seventh night, Cody realized this was only the beginning. Around 3 a.m., something woke him. A faint sound, metal, lightly tapping. Click, click, click. He lay still, listening. The sound came from the backyard, from the empty kennel that had been cleaned and cleared out the day before. He wanted to believe it was the wind, but the wind doesn't make metal click like that. Not rhythmically, not like something tapping, waiting. And then, the tapping stopped. Silence. Cody held his breath. Then he heard it. A slow, soft exhale, right outside his window, as if something was standing there, watching, breathing, waiting. She couldn't enter her house. This story comes from Kyle. It happened in the late 1990s in a small town deep in the bayou of Louisiana. At that time, Kyle and his best friend Pete were about 10 or 11 years old. The two were an inseparable duo. But what bonded them wasn't just friendship. It was a small childhood empire collecting baseball cards. If you grew up in the U.S. in the 90s, you'd understand that feeling. It was a craze. Those stiff cardboard cards printed with players' images, wrapped in protective plastic, with the distinct smell of fresh paper and a piece of bubble gum included. For Kyle and Pete, those cards were more precious than gold. At school, recess or lunchtime was the trading floor. Kyle recalls the atmosphere. The boys would gather in a corner, pulling out thick binders full of cards. "I've got a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card," Want to trade? Dream on. I'll trade you a Cal Ripken card. The negotiations were intense, dramatic. Pete had a shark's mind. He knew how to haggle, how to trade 3 common cards for a rare hologram card that shimmered. That afternoon was Halloween. The festive air filled the town, but for Kyle and Pete, it was more important that they had just pulled off a lucrative trade with some other kids at school. They rode their bikes home, backpacks stuffed with heavy binders, hearts soaring like they'd hit the jackpot. Around 5 p.m., the sun began to set behind the massive cypress trees draped in moss. The bayou air grew damp and heavy. On the way home, they passed Mrs. Landry's house. It was an old, crooked wooden house by the water, isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. As the two passed, she was standing on the small, rotting wooden dock behind her house, struggling with 3 large wicker baskets full of wet clothes she'd just washed in the river. She was frail and trembling, unable to lift a basket onto the porch. Seeing the kids, she waved, her voice raspy. "Hey, you two! Pete, Kyle, can you give me a hand? These are too heavy. My back hurts." The boys, still cheerful, eagerly agreed. They tossed their bikes aside, ran down to the dock, each lifting one end of a basket, heaving the 3 soaking baskets onto the porch for her. "Thank you, children," Mrs. Landry smiled, her face wrinkled into a toothless grin. "Be careful on your way home. It's getting dark." The two said yes and got back on their bikes, but they didn't head straight home. They stopped at an abandoned shack nearby to admire and sort their spoils. All evening, they were engrossed with their Derek Jeter and Barry Bonds cards, debating who would keep which. They completely forgot about helping Mrs. Landry with her laundry and lost track of time. It wasn't until 9 p.m., hungry and with darkness thick as ink, that they panicked and rode home. The roads in Louisiana at night were no place for the faint of heart. There were no streetlights, only weak moonlight reflected off the black water of the swamp. Frogs croaked, insects buzzed, and occasionally a fish splashed, startling anyone nearby. Pete was riding with Kyle behind him, Kyle still clutching his precious card binder. Suddenly, Pete slammed the brakes, clang, right in front of Mrs. Landry's house. Kyle hit the back of his friend. "What the hell, man? Why stop?" Pete didn't answer. He stared at the empty dock behind Mrs. Landry's house. Then he said loudly, "Ma'am, I hear you. I'll come help you." Kyle looked. The house was pitch dark, the door locked, the dock empty. Fog rose off the water. "You're crazy, Pete," Kyle whispered, goosebumps prickling. "There's no one there. Mrs. Landry's asleep." "Look," Pete pointed to the empty space. "She's right there. She said she hasn't finished. One basket's too heavy. She wants me to help." Kyle squinted. No one was there, only the water lapping gently at the pier. But Pete got off the bike. His face was strange, blank, expressionless, eyes wide but lifeless, like he was hypnotized or sleepwalking. He walked stiffly, step by step, onto the wooden dock. Pete reached the middle of the dock, bent as if lifting something incredibly heavy. "It's so heavy, ma'am," he murmured, moving toward the house, stopping at the back door. His expression shifted from surprise to fear. "Huh? Why can't you get inside?" he asked into the void. "The house? Who's stopping you?" Kyle stood on the road, cold fear running down his spine. "Pete, what are you doing? Come back." Pete didn't hear him. He turned toward the black water. "Ma'am, you want me to go the edge?" He stepped forward slowly. Then Kyle saw a horrifying sight. Pete's legs moved forward as if pulled by invisible hands from beneath the water, gripping his ankles, hard. "Kyle, help me!" Pete screamed, breaking the trance with sheer terror. "Mrs. Landry is pulling me! Help!" Kyle threw down his precious binder and shot down the dock like an arrow. He grabbed Pete's arm just as half of him dangled over the black water. Kyle pulled with all his strength. The force beneath the water was monstrous, as if he were wrestling a boulder. Bubbles rose and water churned under their feet, despite the wind being still. Just as they were about to give out, car headlights swept across the yard. An old car turned in. Mrs. Landry's daughter, coming home from her late shift, saw the two struggling at the water's edge and shouted, "Hey, what are you kids doing? It's dangerous!" The pulling force vanished. Kyle yanked Pete back and both fell onto the dock, panting. Pete clutched his ankles, crying, "It hurts! It hurts!" Kyle shone his flashlight on his friend. On Pete's ankles, 5 bruised finger marks were imprinted, cold as ice, smelling of rotting mud. Mrs. Landry's daughter ran down. "What are you kids doing here?" Kyle stammered. "This afternoon, we saw Mrs. Landry doing laundry. Pete saw her standing here, asked me to help, then she lured him to the water." Her face went pale. She trembled. "Mom doing laundry this afternoon? I went to work. The house was dark. I thought she was at a neighbor's. I only saw her sandals on the dock." She broke into tears. "Mom, where are you?" The entire neighborhood was mobilized. Police and neighbors rode out, shining lights all night. The black water remained still. No sign of Mrs. Landry. The next morning, out of options, they called in a local pastor. Pete was brought back. They believed he had a connection to her. Pete sat on the dock holding a white candle. The morning air was gloomy, mist hovering over the river. The pastor laid a hand on his shoulder. "Son, call her back home." Pete closed his eyes, trembling. "Mrs. Landry, please come home." Suddenly, Pete shivered. Cold. So cold. Everyone looked down at his feet. Water began seeping from Pete's soles, soaking his socks and shoes, trickling across the dock. Pete slowly opened his eyes, pointing to the far riverbank, where an ancient cypress tree root stretched into the water. "There, she's standing over there. She's waving at me." Search teams rowed across. They found her. Mrs. Landry's body was trapped in the tree roots under the water, right where Pete had pointed. When they pulled her up, her arms were still stiff, bent as if trying to lift a heavy basket. When the boat carrying her body reached the dock, the pastor prayed loudly to open the path. Pete, sitting on the steps wrapped in a blanket, face pale, suddenly looked up and pointed inside the house, through the living room window. "There, she's inside the fireplace. She's smiling, wearing the wet clothes from this afternoon." The room was empty, but Pete weakly smiled. "She's not angry anymore. She's finally home." As old folklore says, those who die before their time, especially in water, their souls often get lost and cannot enter their homes unless invited by the living. Mrs. Landry had tried to ask Pete for help, but in her panic and longing for home, she almost pulled him in with her. After the funeral, Pete was severely traumatized. He would wake screaming in the middle of the night, feeling cold hands gripping his legs. He said he could always hear the drip, drip of water in the corner of his room whenever it rained. Kyle and Pete gave up card collecting forever. And even as adults, neither dared approach that river after sunset. You painted me black. This story comes from Beth. Beth met her husband Jack in 2014 and they got married in 2016. But their marriage almost didn't happen. When they first met, Jack was your typical Texas guy. Honest, hardworking, and a little rough around the edges. He didn't hide his past. He told Beth about his first love, a girl named Wendy. They had dated for 3 years and were engaged to be married. But tragedy struck. Wendy developed cancer and passed away very young. One day, while they were grabbing coffee, Jack unbuttoned his shirt to show Beth something on his left pec, right over his heart. It was a portrait tattoo of Wendy. The tattoo was a bit crude, done years ago, but you could clearly tell it was a young woman. Jack said he got it right after she died, as a memorial. At first, Beth was touched. But as their relationship got serious and they started talking about marriage, that tattoo became a problem. Imagine laying your head on your husband's chest every night, only to stare directly into the eyes of his dead ex-fiancée. It was too much. Beth demanded he remove it. Jack hesitated. It wasn't the pain of removal he was afraid of. He was afraid of disrespecting the dead. He said, "Honey, can't you just ignore it? I love you, but my past is part of who I am." Beth was furious. She postponed the wedding and moved back to her parents' house in the suburbs of San Antonio. Jack begged her to come back. Finally, he caved. Okay, I'll get rid of it. But you have to do one thing with me. Come with me to the monastery where Wendy's ashes are kept. We'll light a candle, explain it to her, and ask for her blessing. Then I'll remove it. Beth, blinded by jealousy, snapped, "Why the hell do I need permission from a dead woman to marry my own husband? Go do it yourself." Defeated, Jack went to a tattoo parlor alone. Instead of laser removal, which takes too long, he chose the fastest option, a cover-up. He asked the artist to do a blackout, completely covering the portrait with a solid, heavy block of black ink. That night, after the appointment, Jack picked Beth up. They made up and decided to stay at a motel on the way back to town. That night, Beth had a nightmare. In the dream, she was standing in front of an old Gothic monastery in San Antonio. The grounds were dark and overgrown. She walked inside, down a long stone corridor leading to the crypts. At the end of the hall, she saw a girl in a white dress, standing with her back to Beth. Beth walked closer. "Excuse me?" The girl suddenly giggled. He! The sound echoed cold and sharp against the stone walls. "Miss?" Beth called out. The girl slowly turned around. Beth screamed in terror. The girl had no face, but it wasn't just blank. Her face was pitch black. A solid, thick layer of black darkness covered her eyes, nose, and mouth, exactly like the blackout tattoo on Jack's chest. The girl lunged at Beth, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her violently. A voice boomed from that black void of a face filled with hate. "Do you think I look pretty now? My husband erased my face. He painted me black. Are you happy now? You stole him, and now you've done this to me?" She chased Beth through the monastery. Beth ran for her life, tripped, and woke up screaming. She was back in the motel bed, drenched in sweat. Jack was shaking her. "Baby? What's wrong? You were screaming." Beth, sobbing, told him the dream. Jack's face went pale. He confessed, "Wendy, her spirit is strong. Years ago, I thought about removing the tattoo, and she came to me in a dream, too," she said. "If you erase me, you're trying to forget me. Don't forget me." It turned out Jack had been haunted by his ex's spirit for years, a spirit attachment. He hadn't dared to love anyone else or touch the tattoo out of fear. Meeting Beth gave him the courage to move on, but by blacking out her face without making peace first, he had enraged the spirit. The next morning, Beth, Jack, and his parents drove straight to the monastery. They met the priest in charge. He happened to be Wendy's uncle. The priest listened and sighed. She hasn't moved on. She's still tethered to this world by her unfinished love. He led them down to the crypt, to the niche where Wendy's urn was kept. It looked exactly like Beth's dream. She shivered, recognizing the stone hallway. The priest performed a prayer service, sprinkling holy water. He made Jack and Beth promise, "For the next 3 years, you must come here once a month. Light a candle and pray for Wendy. Show her that you are happy, but that you still respect her memory. Only then will she let go." They agreed. They got married shortly after. And for 3 long years, 36 months, no matter the weather, no matter how busy they were, they drove to that monastery every single month to light a candle for Wendy. By the end of 2019, they fulfilled their promise. Beth hasn't had a nightmare since. As for Jack, that solid black square is still on his chest. He's too afraid to remove it. The Drowned Baby's Pillow. This story happened to my Uncle Ted. He and his wife lived in an isolated cabin up in northern Minnesota, near the Boundary Waters. It's beautiful up there, but lonely. The nearest neighbor was usually miles away through thick pine forests. When my Aunt Mary got pregnant with their first son, Baby Jack, money was tight. In that part of the country, people often relied on garage sales or swapping items with neighbors to get by. My grandmother told Ted to go look for some used baby gear to save money. He drove to an old cabin on the other side of the lake. The woman living there gave him a whole box of baby supplies for next to nothing. Inside was a cute little bear-shaped support pillow used to keep a baby on their side. She handed it to him and said, "Take it. I don't need it anymore." She seemed almost too eager to get rid of it. When baby Jack was born, Aunt Mary put him in a sturdy wooden crib right next to their bed. She used that bear pillow to prop him up so he'd sleep soundly. The first night they used the pillow, things got weird. In the middle of the night, Jack started screaming. Ted jumped up and flipped on the light. He saw his son curled up in the corner of the crib, but the bear pillow was thrown all the way across the room, lying on the floor. "That's impossible," Ted muttered. "A newborn can't throw a pillow 5 feet." The second night, Mary tucked the pillow in tight. She even tucked a blanket over it. Around 2 a.m., she heard a sound. Creak, creak. It was the sound of the crib slats straining. She opened her eyes. In the dim nightlight, she watched in horror as the pillow slid out from under her baby's back all on its own, as if someone was gently pulling it. Then, suddenly, it launched into the air and slammed against the wall. Mary screamed and woke Ted. But when he turned on the lights, the room was silent. Ted tried to tell her she was just hallucinating from sleep deprivation. The third night, Ted decided to stay awake and watch. He sat in an armchair in the corner, lights off, just the pale moonlight coming through the window. The cabin was dead silent, just the wind howling through the Minnesota pines outside. Around 3 a.m., the temperature in the room plummeted. It was freezing. Ted looked at the crib. He saw hands. A pair of tiny, pale hands reaching through the slats of the crib. They weren't Jack's hands. Jack's hands were swaddled in his blanket. These hands were skeletal, soaking wet, and the skin was wrinkled like they had been in water for a long time. The hands reached in, groping blindly. They found the bear pillow. Suddenly, from the darkness underneath the crib, a small head slowly rose up. A baby. Its skin was blue and gray. Its hair was plastered to its forehead, dripping wet. Its eyes were pitch black, sunken holes, staring intently at baby Jack. It didn't look evil exactly. It looked like its face was twisted in pure misery and rage. It whispered, the voice sounding like water gurgling in a throat. "Mine! Give it back!" Then, its arm, stretched unnaturally long, reached across the crib, grabbed the pillow, and yanked it violently. Thud! Baby Jack's head hit the mattress hard. He started wailing. The ghost clutched the pillow to its chest, retreated into the shadows, and dissolved into mist, leaving behind a small puddle of dirty lake water on the floorboards. Ted rushed over and grabbed his son. He checked the room, shaking. There was no one there. Just that puddle of water. The next morning, Ted drove straight back to the woman who sold him the stuff. He demanded to know the truth. The woman broke down crying. It turned out, a few months prior, she had left her own baby in a stroller on the dock in front of her house while she ran inside to grab a jacket. She forgot to set the brake. A strong gust of wind blew off the lake. The stroller, with the baby and that bear pillow inside, rolled off the edge and into the freezing water. When she ran out, all she saw was the pillow floating on the surface. The baby had sunk with the stroller. The body was never recovered. She had kept the pillow, but every night she heard her baby crying for it. Terrified and heartbroken, she slipped it into Ted's box at the garage sale, hoping to get rid of the haunting. She didn't realize that her child's spirit, so attached to the only thing that floated back up, had followed the pillow all the way to Ted's house to take it back. Ted and his family gave the pillow back. They went with the woman to the dock and threw the pillow out into the lake, right where the baby had gone under. From that day on, the cabin was peaceful again. Asleep in the Combine. This story comes from Kenny. It takes place in the late 90s when he was just 6 or 7 years old. At the time, Kenny's parents were going through a rough patch financially in the city. They were drowning in debt and needed time to get back on their feet. Unable to take care of Kenny, they sent him to stay with his Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim on their farm in rural Kansas. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim were salt-of-the-earth farmers. They owned a massive wheat farm. Their farmhouse sat completely isolated in the middle of endless fields. There were no neighbors for miles, just the sound of the wind rushing through the dry wheat, sounding like whispering voices. Kenny was a city kid. The farm was a whole new world. During the day, he chased chickens and played in the dirt. But at night, the farm terrified him. It was pitch black with no streetlights, just the deafening sound of crickets and coyotes howling in the distance. Aunt Sarah loved Kenny, but she had one strict rule. Never go outside after the sun goes down. She always made sure Kenny was inside and within eyesight once twilight hit. One night, Uncle Jim had some people over. A few neighboring farmers and some grain buyers came to talk business. They sat on the front porch, drinking beer and eating grilled sausages. Because the farmhouse was small and the men were loud, Kenny couldn't sleep. Aunt Sarah wanted to be out on the porch with her husband to make sure he didn't get lowballed on the wheat prices, but she didn't want to leave Kenny alone in the guest room. She came up with an idea. In the guest room where Kenny slept, there was a large vanity mirror on the wall, directly opposite the door. From the bed, if you looked into the mirror, you could see the reflection of the living room and part of the front porch through the open door. "You stay in bed," Aunt Sarah told him. "Just look in the mirror. You can see me sitting right there. I'm not going anywhere." Kenny lay in bed staring at the mirror. He watched the reflection of his aunt and uncle drinking and laughing. It made him feel safe, and he drifted off. In the middle of the night, Kenny woke up with a start. He heard a whisper. Hey, you awake, kid?" The voice came from the doorway. Kenny opened his eyes and looked at the door. No one was there. He looked into the mirror, and the reflection, standing right in his doorway, were two men. They were wearing dirty, dusty overalls, covered in straw and mud. They were standing there, staring into his room. Kenny quickly turned his head to look at the actual doorway. Empty. He rubbed his eyes and looked back at the mirror. They were still there. And now they were stepping into the room. He heard the heavy thud of work boots and a wet, wheezing sound. Terrified, Kenny pulled the quilt over his head and squeezed his eyes shut. A while later, Aunt Sarah came in to check on him. She found him shaking under the covers. Kenny told her about the two dirty men in the mirror. Aunt Sarah's face went pale. She didn't scold him. She just whispered to Uncle Jim, "They're back. They're walking around again." A few days later, Uncle Jim had friends over drinking again. This time, they were drinking whiskey. By late night, the friends had left. Uncle Jim was wasted and passed out on the living room sofa. Aunt Sarah went to sleep in Kenny's room to keep him company. Around midnight, Kenny woke up. He had to pee bad. He didn't want to wake his aunt. The bathroom was inside, but Kenny was scared of the old, noisy plumbing, and he'd seen his uncle just step off the back porch to relieve himself before. He decided to be brave and use the backyard. He opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. It was a moonless night, pitch black. After he finished, he turned to go back inside. That's when he saw them. At the picnic table in the backyard, where the adults usually sat, there were two dark figures sitting. There was still a bottle of whiskey and some glasses left on the table. The dim yellow porch light cast long, eerie shadows. Kenny innocently thought it was Uncle Jim and a friend who hadn't left. He was hungry and thirsty, as kids often are at night. He walked closer. "Uncle Jim, can I have a sip of soda? I'm hungry." The two figures sat rigid, their backs to him. Kenny got closer. "Uncle Jim." Suddenly, a raspy, gurgling voice spoke up. He came out. The second figure replied, "Does he see us?" Kenny froze. That wasn't his uncle's voice. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and looked closer. The two men were sitting on the bench. Their clothes were tattered, stained with grease and dried blood. And above their shoulders, there was nothing. Both men were headless. Their shirt collars were soaked in dark black blood. The stumps of their necks were jagged and raw. Kenny screamed, "Ghost, Mom! Aunt Sarah, help!" He fell backward and fainted right there in the dirt. He woke up 3 days later, running a high fever. When he finally came to, he told Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim what he saw. This time, they didn't hide it. Uncle Jim told him the truth. Those two men were seasonal farm hands who used to work on this farm years ago, back when Kenny's grandfather ran it. That year, the wheat harvest was intense. The family had rented a massive combine harvester to get the job done. These two workers were heavy drinkers. One night, after getting drunk, instead of going back to the bunkhouse, they stumbled into the fields. They saw the massive combine and climbed up into the header, the front part with the blades, to sleep, thinking it would shelter them from the wind. The next morning, the combine driver arrived early. The wheat was tall, and he didn't check the header. He just fired up the engine and engaged the blades. The roar of the machine drowned out any screams. The massive spinning blades pulled both men in. They were crushed instantly. The blades decapitated them before the driver even knew they were there. The driver only realized what happened when he saw blood spraying across the windshield of the cab. Since that gruesome accident, locals said the two men died while drunk and asleep, so they didn't know they were dead. Their ghosts still wandered the farm, still looking for a drink, still walking around like they were alive, just without their heads. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jim knew they were there. That's why the farm was so successful. They believed the ghosts were guarding the land. To keep them happy, Uncle Jim would leave bottles of beer and chewing tobacco by the old picnic table every week. But for Kenny, a city kid with a weak constitution, seeing them was too much trauma. That very afternoon, Kenny's parents drove down to pick him up. They never sent him back to that farm again. The Pervert, in room 505. This story comes from Heather. One summer, Heather and her husband, Hank, decided to take a road trip on their motorcycle from their home in Richmond down to Virginia Beach. They hadn't had a couple's getaway since their kids were born, so they were really looking forward to it. They booked a budget-friendly oceanfront hotel online. They left early in the morning, taking the scenic route across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. The view was amazing, but their luck ran out halfway there. Their rear tire blew out on a lonely stretch of highway. They spent the entire afternoon waiting for a tow truck and getting it fixed. By the time they finally rolled into Virginia Beach, it was late afternoon, bordering on evening. They were exhausted, sweaty, and covered in road dust. They walked into the lobby. The front desk clerk was a guy named Gary. He looked them up and down with a sneer. "Sorry," he said, "you guys are way too late. We gave your reservation away. It's peak season." Heather was furious. "What? I already paid for it online." "Policy is policy," Gary shrugged. "If you don't check in by 4 p.m., we release the room." He pretended to type on his computer for a second, then leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. "Look, I do have one room left. It's the penthouse suite on the top floor. Ocean view, jacuzzi tub, the works. Usually goes for $500 a night, but if you slide me a $50 bill right now, I can let you have it for the price you already paid." Heather knew exactly what he was doing. He was shaking them down for a tip. Because she was already stressed from the bike breakdown, she snapped. "I am not giving you a dime. You give me a room right now, or I'm calling your manager." Gary looked around. The lobby was getting busy. Not wanting a scene, his expression hardened. "Fine, I'll see what I can do." He ducked down, rummaged through a drawer, and pulled out an old-fashioned metal key with a plastic tag. "Room 505, 5th floor." He handed it over with a nasty little smirk. Heather and Hank grabbed their bags and took the elevator up. They found room 505. When they opened the door, they were shocked. The room was incredible. It was a massive suite, separate living room, a master bedroom, smaller guest bedroom, and a huge bathroom with a jacuzzi jet tub. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked right out over the Atlantic Ocean. "Wow," Hank said. "That jerk actually hooked us up. He probably got scared you'd report him." They forgot all their anger. Event 1. The TV Hank immediately filled the jacuzzi to wash off the road grime. Heather went into the master bedroom to call her mom and check on the kids. Suddenly, the massive TV in the living room blasted on. It was at max volume, blaring some loud reality TV show. "Hank!" Heather yelled. "Turn it down! I'm on the phone!" No answer. The TV started flipping channels rapidly. Click, click, click. Heather, annoyed, hung up and ran into the living room. It was empty. Hank was still in the bathroom with the door closed. She could hear the water running. Weird. She grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. Event 2. The minibar. Heather was thirsty. She opened the minibar in the living room. It was stocked with those little liquor bottles and expensive sodas. She drank a bottle of water, threw the empty plastic bottle in the trash, and lay down on the sofa for a quick nap. She drifted off. In her half-sleep, she heard footsteps. She assumed it was Hank. Then, she heard the minibar door open and close. Clink, clank. Glass bottles hitting each other. She sat up. "Honey, what are you drinking? Those things cost a fortune." Silence. She got up and walked over. The minibar door was wide open. 3 or 4 mini liquor bottles and sodas had been pulled out, opened, and poured out onto the carpet. A sticky, wet mess. What the hell? Hank? Hank walked out of the bathroom right then, drying his hair with a towel. "What?" "I just got out of the tub." They both looked at the mess on the floor. Neither could explain it, but they were so tired and the room was so nice they just shrugged it off. Maybe the fridge shelf is slanted, Hank guessed. Event 3. The Night of Terror. They went out for a late dinner and came back around midnight. They decided to sleep in the master bedroom because the mattress was softer. The smaller guest bedroom had an old springy mattress that squeaked every time you touched it. Around 1 a.m., Heather was awake, scrolling on her phone. The door between the bedrooms was open. She heard a sound from the guest room. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The rhythmic sound of bed springs, like someone was sitting on the edge of the bed, bouncing up and down. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Hank, half asleep, mumbled, "It's just the wind, babe." Heather tried to sleep. She rolled onto her side, facing away from Hank. Hank draped his arm over her waist from behind, spooning her. A few minutes later, she felt Hank's hand start to wander. It stroked her back, moved down to her hip, and then slipped inside her pajama shorts, rubbing her butt. Heather smiled, thinking her husband was in the mood. She lay still, letting him continue. The hand rubbed for a moment, and then pinched her. Hard. It wasn't a playful pinch. It was a vicious, painful twist of the skin. "Ow!" Heather yelled, spinning around. "What is wrong with you? That hurt!" She looked at Hank. Hank was flat on his back, fast asleep, snoring softly. Both of his hands were resting on his chest, on top of the blanket, feet away from her. So, whose hand was that? Before Heather could process it, the TV in the bedroom blasted on. Boom! White noise at full volume. At the same exact second, the minibar door in the living room started slamming open and shut. Bang, bang, bang! Both of them jumped out of bed, screaming. "Go! Go!" Hank yelled. They grabbed their clothes, didn't even bother packing the suitcase properly, and sprinted out of the room, barefoot, running all the way down to the lobby. It was 2 a.m. There was a different clerk at the desk now, a guy named Mike. "Checking out?" he asked, surprised. That room is haunted." Heather was hyperventilating. "Which room?" 505. Mike's face went pale. He picked up the key they had thrown on the counter. "Oh, God, who gave you this?" "The guy from the afternoon shift, Gary." Mike sighed, shaking his head in disgust. "That son of a bitch. He did it again." Mike explained. "Room 505. We keep it locked. We don't rent it out. The only other suite on that floor is 506, right next door." "Why?" "Years ago," Mike lowered his voice, "a guest died in 505. He was a perv. He died of a heart attack while he was pleasuring himself in the bed. His ghost is still there. He's nasty. He likes to watch women, touch them. It turned out Gary was mad that Heather yelled at him and refused to pay the bribe, so he gave them the key to the haunted pervert room on purpose to punish them." Mike apologized profusely. He immediately moved them to room 506, the exact same layout, but clean, and comped their stay. Heather and Hank moved next door. The difference was instant. The air was warmer, lighter. They slept like rocks until morning. They checked out the next day and left. Heather swore she would never go back to that hotel, and definitely never argue with a front desk clerk again. She was brushing her hair. This story comes from Clara. It takes place in the late 90s when she was about 6 or 7 years old. Clara's family lived deep in the rural backwoods of Kentucky. Her grandmother, Grandma May, was the matriarch of a massive, chaotic household. She took in every stray relative, down on their luck cousin, and single mother in the family. At one point, there were nearly 20 people living in that old farmhouse. To make ends meet, everyone worked. In that part of Kentucky, that meant tobacco. During harvest season, it was brutal work. They'd be out in the fields from dawn until dusk, coming home covered in dirt, sweat, and sticky tobacco gum. With that many people, the single bathroom in the house was a nightmare. So, on hot summer evenings, the women and children would head down to a natural pond tucked away behind the woods to wash off the day's grind. Right next to that pond, maybe 30 feet away, sat an old stone well. It had been dry for decades, choked with weeds and moss. It was the night of a full moon. The family had worked later than usual, trying to finish a specific field before the rain came. By the time they got down to the pond to wash, it was already twilight. The women and kids were splashing around, scrubbing off the dirt. Clara was playing in the shallows when she looked over at the old well. Under the bright moonlight, she saw it clearly. There was a woman sitting on the edge of the stone well. She was wearing a vintage floral dress, the kind nobody wore anymore. Her long, dark hair hung down her back. She was miming the motion of pulling up a bucket, even though the well had no rope, and then tilting her head back, pouring invisible water over herself, and slowly stroking her wet hair. Clara, being a kid, just assumed it was one of her aunts. She looked around the pond, counting heads. Aunt Sarah, Cousin Beth, Mom. Everyone was in the water, so who was on the well? Clara tugged on her aunt's arm. "Auntie, who's that washing her hair on the well?" "I thought it was dry." Her aunt laughed. "You're crazy, child. That well's been dry since before I was born. It's just trash down there." "No, look, there's a lady." Her aunt squinted into the gloom. She shook her head. "I don't see anyone. It's just shadows." Frustrated, Clara turned to her cousin Tammy, who was the same age. "Tammy, look, do you see the lady?" Tammy stared at the well. Then she nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, she's brushing her hair. Look, she's smiling at me." Clara felt vindicated. "See? Tammy sees her." But when the aunt looked again, she still saw nothing. A cold shiver went down her spine. She suddenly felt exposed. "All right, everyone out. Let's get back to the house, now." As the women were drying off and getting dressed, the aunt turned to dry Clara. Suddenly, Clara screamed, "Auntie, look at Tammy!" The aunt spun around. Tammy had wandered away from the group. She was walking toward the well in a trance. She reached the stone wall and began to climb. It was too high for a 7-year-old to climb easily, but Tammy scrambled up it like a spider. She sat perched on the rim of the black hole, legs dangling over the edge. She tilted her head to the side, closed her eyes, and began making slow, rhythmic motions with her hands, brushing her hair. She was smiling a wide, dreamy, unnatural smile. She was mimicking the woman exactly. The aunt screamed, dropping the towels, and sprinted over. She yanked Tammy down hard, spanking her. "Are you crazy? You could have fallen in." Tammy burst into tears, terrified. "I didn't know. The lady told me to come sit. She said it's cool down there. She wanted to play." The women, now thoroughly spooked, grabbed the kids and ran all the way back to the farmhouse. Back at the house, Tammy seemed lethargic and strange, so Grandma May put her to bed early in the kids' room. The adults sat on the porch, talking in hushed tones. A while later, Clara snuck into the bedroom to check on Tammy. Tammy wasn't sleeping. She was sitting up in bed, back against the wall, legs crossed. She was doing it again, brushing her invisible hair. Clara whispered, "Tammy, come play with me." Tammy slowly lifted her head. She looked at Clara and smiled. The smile was too wide. It stretched almost to her ears. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Clara froze in terror. Then, Tammy stood up. She didn't move like a child. She walked with a swaying, seductive gait like a grown woman. She walked right past Clara, out the back door, heading straight for the woods. Clara followed her. "Tammy." In the dark backyard, Tammy stopped. She turned around. That horrible grin was still on her face. "Why are you following me?" she said, her voice different. "Come here. Come with me. It's so much fun down there." Clara screamed for help. The adults came running. The moment they surrounded her, Tammy's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed unconscious. When she woke up, Tammy was hysterical. "I'm scared. That lady keeps calling my name. She was standing at the window. She's waving for me to go to the well. She says there's water down there. She wants me to swim with her." Grandma May turned pale. She called Grandpa out to the porch. Grandpa sighed, lit a cigarette, and finally told them the truth about the well. "That well used to be the main water source for this land back in the 60s, he said. "There was a local girl named Helen. Beautiful girl, long black hair. She was vain about it, used to go out to the well every evening to wash it. One late evening, she was out there alone, washing her hair. A drifter, some seasonal hand working the harvest, came walking by. He saw her, wet, alone in the middle of nowhere, and he snapped. He attacked her from behind. Helen fought like a hellcat, clawed his face up. That made him mad. He beat her right there against the stone wall. In his rage, he ripped her dress off. He stripped her naked right there in the mud, and he violated her, brutally. When he was done, she was barely breathing, trying to crawl away. He panicked. He grabbed her by that long hair and smashed her head against the stone rim of the well. Crack! She went limp, blood everywhere. The guy, terrified he'd be caught, shoved her naked body down into the darkness. He gathered up her torn clothes and threw them down after her, then ran. The next morning, folks went to draw water. The first bucket that came up was red, thick with blood. They shined a light down. Helen was floating at the bottom, stark white, naked, staring up at them. They caught the guy later. But the well was ruined. Bad blood, they said. They filled it in partially and abandoned it. Too many people claimed they could hear crying coming from it. Her spirit, violated and murdered in such a violent way, had never left. She was still there, obsessively cleaning herself, brushing her hair, and luring children who were sensitive to join her in the dark. The next morning, the family didn't call a priest. In these parts, you go to a granny witch, an old mountain healer who knows the old ways. The granny witch took one look at Tammy and said, "She's got a spirit attached to her. That haint is lonely. She wants to take the girl for a companion. You have to give her her dignity back." Following the witch's instructions, the family went to town. They bought a beautiful new dress, a hand mirror, a silver comb, and makeup. They took the items to the old well. They didn't burn them. They threw them one by one down into the dark, trash-filled shaft. The witch had warned them, "Once you throw the last thing, turn around and walk away. Do not look back, no matter what you hear." They did exactly as they were told. That night, Tammy slept peacefully. When she woke up, the color was back in her cheeks, and she remembered nothing of the night before. From that day on, no one in the family ever went near that pond or that well again. Years later, the land was sold and filled in to build an elementary school. Clara says she often wonders, do the kids at that new school ever look out the window on a moonlit night and see a naked woman sitting in the playground brushing her hair?